but not when you get sued. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Lindy.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, Lindy.
So I have an idea. I was thinking about having babies and how that seems really overwhelming, but I think that people with good genes and the ability to be good parents have a moral obligation to have children.
There's a lot to unpack in that one. You just
I know.
used a lot.
I threw a lot
words
at you. But the thing I was thinking about, so yeah, the world is potentially overpopulated, but if you have good genes to pass on, like healthy genes, like so I'm not giving my kid a really high chance of some really rare disease that I don't want to be passing along. Or, I know I can be a good parent and raise good kids, although you can never know. I have an obligation to make sure that those kids would be around in the next generation to help influence other kids to make good decisions, to help do things like solve climate change. And the more I think about it, the more I think if I'm capable, of doing a good job of being a parent, I should be obligated to have children so that they can have a positive influence on the next generation in the future.
You are very positive that you're one of those good genes type people, apparently.
I might not be. So this also comes from obviously, how do you even know that you are the person who should or shouldn't?
Yeah, that was my first question. Who defines good?
Yeah.
And we're talking about genes genetics, not like my blue jeans I'm wearing right now.
Yeah,
right?
genes genetics. My genes are just okay. They're pretty boring.
Sorry, I just had to. I've been a dad now for 3 years, and that was too obvious.
I'm wearing pajama pants anyway, so it wasn't too exciting on my end.
So my question was so what are good genes? Did you have a definition of coming into this of what good is?
To me, I'm just looking at no major genetic diseases. So I'm looking at that.
Oh, that's a low bar.
Yeah, I'm looking at the low bar of no major genetic diseases that you wouldn't want to pass on to the next generations. I have friends who have genetic issues where they say, "Oh, I don't want to reproduce because I don't want to pass on genes that would give kids the condition that I have or that runs in my family."
Okay, but that's an extraordinarily low bar. Actually, I thought you were going to come at me with at least some kind of trade off, is good attractive or is good smart, is good athletic. I thought there would be some definition of good that isn't just, you're saying more like people that are healthy.
Yeah, I mean people who are healthy by good genetics. But I mean healthy in ways that connect to your genetics, because you can also have ways that are completely nature where that shouldn't be the case.
A caveat to that would be, in this world where we can determine if your genetic makeup will produce a child that has a particular disease, I'm assuming that if we can tell that, we will probably at that point be able to fix that.
Yeah.
And we can already fix some of these things.
So maybe everyone is genetically good.
So the other question that this statement begs is, okay, so if people who are genetically superior are morally responsible for procreating, then does that mean that if you are genetically inferior, that you should not be allowed to procreate?
Well, that's why I purposely put it that way, because I don't think you should ever be allowed to tell someone they can't procreate. They should still always have that choice, and I don't think it's okay to tell people they can't procreate, but I think it's good to encourage people who have good genes to procreate.
Well, encourage is not what you said, though.
That's true.
You said that they should have to do it.
Yeah. So maybe I'm getting into eugenics here, and I've just said something horrible.
Well, that was the obvious slope we were going here.
Yeah. And I don't know where the line is.
Well, you did say have a moral obligation. So moral then to me signifies a religious. Use moral and not ethical. So moral to me has a religious connotation to it, or some higher power is obligating you to do it.
It's one thing I was thinking about, too, when I wrote it and sent it to you guys, and I was looking it up. I was really trying to look up the definition of moral and what it means. And the definition isn't actually it's not that exciting. So.
No, really?
So it's kind of concerned with the principles of right and wrong behavior and the goodness or badness of human character. So the reason I stuck with moral is because the way I was thinking about it is kind of coming from a place of wanting people who would be good to be in the next generation. So it's almost wanting people who are good now to procreate so that there's a higher number of really good kids in the next generation. Because I think people really influence each other. So I think one really good kid, like in a class in elementary school, can make all of their other classmates better, good people. People can be very influential.
But you define good as healthy. You didn't define it as good-natured.
So the gene part, I'm talking about healthy. The being a good parent part, I'm talking about being good in a more moral sense.
Okay, so I have another caveat. There are probably a lot of very successful, very smart people who have had either serious diseases or serious hardships because of their health that possibly might have or did definitively propel them to their success. For example, Stephen Hawking. It's hard to tell whether or not he accomplished the things that he accomplished. If he was just a normal, healthy person, would he have done all the things that he did?
So Stephen Hawking's a good example, but there's several other examples that I've actually remembering. And it's from some kind of Malcolm Gladwell type book, where even the person that figured out the cure for leukemia may have been like dyslexic, something along those lines. But where even slight impediments in the way they're thinking or in their upbringing that made them have to conquer a challenge did impact their future like discoveries in some way. That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and I don't know what the right answer is on that. When you think about it too, even someone, let's say, who was raised by not very good parents, overcoming those childhood obstacles could also give them unique insight and perspective in coming up with an answer to something or a drive to solve issues.
You're not saying people with bad genes and the ability to be bad parents. You're not saying the inverse is.
Yeah. So I still believe in procreation for people where the inverse is true. What I'm saying is that if you're someone who has the ability to be a really good parent, like even adopting, let's say you don't reproduce because you have bad genes from a health perspective, I still think that you should be raising children in order to be positively influencing the next generation.
I like how you said we, meaning that you do again believe that you are a good parent.
Which, if anyone met my dog, they'd think I'm probably not.
You don't really know if you're going to be a good parent until you become a parent.
Yeah, so I think that's the most interesting idea. It's kind of, can you even know if you'd be a good parent? Like, Chris, you're a parent.
Yeah, you have no idea. At least I had no idea what the hell was coming. So, I mean, my closest, I had never held a thing that was under like 2 years old before I had my first kid. It isn't so much the parenting that's hard. It's just the impact on the rest of your life that's incredibly interesting, in that it just changes everything. So dating someone, being engaged, getting married, at least for me, had no obvious effect on my day-to-day life. But having a kid is just, oh my God, now your time is no longer your time. It's their time. And so it has a profound influence on just your day-to-day life. And so even and that will impact your ability to parent one way or the other. And that I don't know if you can be prepared for it. Maybe having a dog gets you kind of like as like a practice run, but it is like literally life-changing.
I'm not a parent, but I've heard from every single person who is one that everything you just said, Chris, that your time is no longer your own. And so I would imagine that most parents go into it with at least an intellectual understanding of that. And yet when they first encounter it, they are totally unprepared, as though they didn't know that, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And so
at least that's my perspective, was with all those caveats. And my other fun thing to say is that we've been paying for daycare for 3 years now, and I just passed my Tesla. So like I could have bought a Tesla with all the money that I've spent in daycare so far.
And that brings up an interesting point. Can people even afford to have kids anymore? Because we're coming into a world where people don't have enough money to even take care of themselves. How do they take care of a child on top of that?
Yeah, so you've been kind of alluding to it, I think, a lot. But like your definition of a good parent is someone that has the ability, probably both financially and physically, to take care of the child. So that's what you mean by good parent?
Yeah, and that's not a judgment on the person. That's a quality of the situation.
I mean, you're very actively then saying there's this nature aspect and the nurture aspect. And the nature aspect is actually not the important part of this particular thought. It's actually, at least from like my understanding of just healthy, Right. That kind of like almost negates the importance of like the first.
Yeah, I'm much
the
more
first part, 'cause
discussing the
most
nurture
people are
part.
healthy.
Yeah.
I don't think when people read the statement initially think that's where you're going with it.
What it's bringing up for me is that so many parents, from no fault of their own, aren't going to be able to do all of the nurturing that they need to be able to do because they're worrying about putting food on the table or they're worrying about taking care of something. And something I've really seen myself, one of my ex-boyfriends, his parents are just very nurturing people. And I've seen the number of kids, well, I guess adults now, but they were kids, that they have touched through their children and provided that nurturing to people beyond their own family. And I think that when you have kids, it gives you access to helping nurture and take care of such a broad, large group of people. And I think that we live in a world where so many parents don't have the opportunity to do all of the things they want to do for their kids. And if you do have those opportunities, having kids allows you to do that for more than just your own children.
Good genes, good parents. If they're separate, let's say some people have good genes, some people have the ability to be good parents. Should we then farm the good people, the good genes, use them to farm humans somehow to then give to the good parents? Like, should we be splitting the nature and nurture? When I first heard your thought, I was thinking, okay, we want smart people who can be good parents to like go and have a bunch of sex. But then I was thinking, well, why don't we just have them skip the sex part and instead just have them, in vitro, like just, farm eggs, farm sperm and go to town and like creating people. But that's not quite, I guess, the spirit of your actual statement.
But I still think that statement is interesting in and of itself, because I do think that having, let's say, intelligence is partially nature, that's still something that you want to pass on so that there are smart people around who solve things like climate change, figuring out how to get, climate change to reverse and stuff like that. So I honestly wouldn't be completely opposed to us genetic farming. I mean, that's what you do when you go to a sperm bank. You're going through and you're saying, I want these genes.
But Neil deGrasse Tyson, like, does he have an obligation to like give to as many sperm banks as he can every day as part of his daily routine? Should be like, I'm going to stop at a sperm bank today.
I would
almost.
Well, there are other things at hand in that particular example, but I would argue yes. I would argue that he probably should be doing that.
So there's a movie called The Boys from Brazil, and it's a very old movie, and I'm going to spoil it right now. So basically, the movie is about a post-World War II scenario where there is a underground legion of Nazis who are essentially recreating Hitler across the planet, and they cloned Hitler several times and put these little baby Hitlers with parents who resembled the actual Hitler's parents. So they were trying to duplicate every single one of the variables of Hitler's life to see if they could raise another Hitler. It was actually a really good movie, and even though I just spoiled it, everybody should go watch it. It's very interesting. But so that kind of brings up the idea that we don't really know what the cocktail is in terms of how we develop. I mean, maybe we could use machine learning and figure out, okay, these people with these specific genes end up with people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Stephen Hawking. But is there something else to that? Like, is there another Mozart right now who's an accountant in Des Moines, Iowa, who doesn't even know that they have a gift, right? And so we don't really know. So I feel like in the Neil deGrasse Tyson example that you gave, Chris, we would have to do what they did in Boys from Brazil, where we need to give him exactly the same upbringing as the original one did to get another Neil deGrasse Tyson. And even then, we may not.
Yeah, well, so the nice thing about sitting in front of a computer talking to you guys is that I've had her statement in front of me the whole time. And after you read it like 30 times, so even though you say a moral obligation, the fact that you're using moral and you're actually not using it in a religious sense makes this not a command. It's not an imperative that one must. There's no greater force like the government saying go do this, Neil deGrasse Tyson. the statement isn't actually as jarring as you originally sounded when you first said it. So in this particular case, it would be interesting to see what would happen if a sperm bank just had, like, let's say you could pick from professional athletes, from the smartest people in the world. What would happen would be very interesting. But yeah, you wouldn't get the same person every time, obviously, even with the same genetic makeup.
And also this brings up even a greater idea than that. Like, should we be hunting for exceptional outliers? Like, are exceptional outliers even what we should want? Like, is the world better off or not better off with people who are exceptional outliers? Like, do we need amazing artists? Do we need amazing scientists? And Paul brought up earlier, we don't even know the recipe to find that. And as you said before, it could be hardship, like of illness, that helps you get there. And maybe the hunting for it is the thing that would make you least likely to get it.
Yeah, the idea that you can somehow recreate something from a singular origin versus it not being this diversified evolution of society. To go back to Neil deGrasse Tyson, would he exist if it weren't for society versus just cloning somebody who was smart? Would we get the same result? I don't think we would. I think that somehow there's a diversity that happens. Again, this came up in the last podcast. Something about humanity and diversity, or life in general, is important. And I guess that maybe speaks to if only smart people were to procreate magically and make children, or if only healthy people, based on zero scientific evidence, I would posit that perhaps we would end up with unhealthy people eventually. But that's not what you're saying, as Chris said. You're not saying that unhealthy people shouldn't. You're saying that healthy people should.
Yeah. And I think probably where I was coming from, it was thinking about the fact that so many of my friends and peers who I think would be very good parents are considering not being parents. Like, Chris is one of my only friends from college who's reproduced. And I see that happen.
God, it sounds so gross when you say it that
way. And so he's one of the only ones who's had a baby, who is now a child. And when I see it, it makes me sad because these are people who I want to see reproduce. So I almost want to give them
Now you want to watch me have sex? God, Lindy, come on.
I want to give them a moral responsibility to do it so that they do it, because I think they'd be great parents. And I think their kids can do great things for the world.
That's also, that's one point too that you said since the beginning of your statement too, that there's like this compounding externality of having healthy people with a good upbringing, right? I feel like that, right, at its core is what you're saying, is that people that can have healthy kids in a good environment will then have this externality of the creating a better world around them.
Yeah. Which
I think, right, it doesn't seem like that doesn't actually seem like terribly controversial. I mean, I feel like on the average of averages, right, like the people in those situations will turn out, okay.
But did you just describe millennials in the sense that millennials are as close to that description that you just gave as probably any group of humans have been? And millennials have their own set of challenges. So I don't say that from the outside. I myself am a millennial. So,
but we don't have it. I mean, millennials also have. I mean, people make fun of them, but it's because like we live in the best of all worlds so far, right? Like up until this point in history, right, 100 years ago, if you had to get your tooth, like you couldn't get your cavity filled, you had to get your tooth removed, or you were dying in surgery because they didn't understand how germ theory worked, right? And now we're at the point where we get to be concerned with how do we optimize the upbringing of children for the next generation, right? Like we're optimizing like on the margins now. So it's true that like millennials bitch about housing. Housing is much more expensive than it used to be. I think we're probably making less money for the same level of education. You're making less money and all that jazz. But we don't have to worry about smallpox. We have literal the whole of human intelligence is in your pocket now. So it's actually another perk of being a millennial is you get to worry about where you're going to get your avocado toast on Tuesday.
Well, and you also have to worry about who's going to change your tire because of those things. And so are we optimizing ourselves out of our own facility? That's one of the challenges of being a millennial is that we don't know how to do anything.
Well, it's because we don't need to, right? You can pay a machine or somebody to do it for you, which is super pompous. Oh my God, it sound like myself, but like, oh my God.
Well, who fixes? Yeah, I mean, this is a Twilight Zone episode now, but who fixes the machine when it breaks down? I mean, it's like, or I guess that's what happened in the time travel book, H.G. Wells. What's it called? The Time Machine.
So, Lindy, would you change or amend your thought in any way, or would you stick to your original thought?
I would stick to my original thought. I think it's more about me wanting to make sure that I think people who would be really good parents are the ones who are most hesitant to reproduce, and a lot of the time. And I want those people to not be hesitant. I want them to add to the next generation. And, obviously I only see the people closest to me, but I think it's a really important thing to contribute to future generations. And obviously you can do it in ways that don't involve having children. You can also volunteer and work with other kids, but I think having kids gives you a really unique access to influencing the next generation.
So are you going to the sperm bank right after this?
No, it doesn't mean I'm going to have kids. I'm keeping my IUD right where it is.
I keep making fun of you for saying that you're talking about yourself, but you are talking about yourself, right? Like you have.
It's something I've thought about myself, whether I want to have kids and whether I feel like I have a moral responsibility to do so or not.
Mm-hmm.
And whether I can affect the world in a more positive way by not having kids and having all of that time and money and freedom, or whether I can affect the world in a more positive way by